Now, for more on this, we're joined by Talip Küçükcan, who is a former Turkish MP and senior fellow at the TRT World Research Centre, who wrote extensively about the Turkish experience in Europe. And also joining me in the studio is Farid Hafez, who's a lecturer at the University of Salzburg and specialises in Islamophobia. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here on Straight Talk. Now, Farid, I want to start with you and get the German perspective. Why is Germany doing this and why now?
Well, I think there is a couple of reasons. Like the larger picture in general is, first of all, that there is something called embassy Islam, right? So until the late 1990s, throughout Europe, not only in Germany, but throughout Europe, every single nation state relied on the Islam politics coming from the sending countries, from Turkey, from Algeria, from Egypt, and so on and so forth. So there was the idea that Muslims won't stay, so their governments should take care of their citizens in terms of religious affairs. So this is one side. Since 20 years, there has been a shift, which is that the ministries of interior in countries like Germany, for instance, they have started developing projects on how to domesticate Islam in a way. So there is an attempt by European nation states to create what they call a French, a German, an Austrian, a British, whatever kind of Islam.
Interesting point you say that, and I want to come back to the idea of domesticating Islam that you mentioned. Talib, to you, how has Turkey reacted to this, and what can it practically do? Because these mosques, 900 of them, are in Germany.
Well, actually, Turks have started going to Germany since the 1960s. And since then, of course, they went there with their culture, with their religion, and they wanted to reproduce their Islamic culture and heritage over there. When they started establishing mosques, they approached the German government, they approached many organizations there, but their religious needs were not satisfied and met by the receiving country. And then they turned back to Turkey. And upon their actual request, Turkey started sending imams over there. So that was a necessity, and I think it was also the right of this Muslim minority in Germany, because practicing your religion and also teaching your religion to your kids is a fundamental, I think, basic human right. And I think that's what has been practiced. And Turkey has invested a lot, not because Turkey would like to influence people outside, but it was the request and demand by the Turkish diaspora, both in Europe and elsewhere. And now we are talking about a great number of mosques. Who will be replaced, those imams? Mm-hmm. Who will be replacing the religious teachers and preachers? I think Germany is playing a very dangerous game and trying to securitize Islam and Muslims. Now today, Islam and Muslims are part of German society, and most of those people, the Turkish community, the members of the congregation, actually they were born and brought up in Germany. They speak German much better than Turkish. But also they would like to keep their religious identity intact, but in cooperation with the German society. And it seems that the German government is thinking that the Islam is an obstacle to integration. It is not, in my mind. If you allow people to practice their religion, it is not an obstacle to integration, actually. What is obstacle to the integration is racism, discrimination, and not having a clear and sustainable policy towards immigration.
Okay, I want to come to that later. But back to you, Farid. As you've called this actually, Germany is playing a dangerous game. What has been the reaction from the Turkish community in Germany? Yes.
Well, I think since a long time, I think the whole problem of what you just called the securitization of Islam has been there. And people feel it, right? They feel it on the ground. I mean, in Germany, you have this idea of defending democracy. It's kind of a state principle. So the Ministry of Interior, the Office for the Protection of the Constitution, which is kind of the secret service of the German Ministry of Interior, it publishes an annual report. So part of it is, for instance, to say like the Islamic community of Miligöriş, which is one of the largest, strongest communities after the Ditib, they have been observed by these institutions. So obviously, many of these institutions, they see themselves as being marginalized, as being criminalized, and that has not a very positive effect. I think really the larger picture is also from a structural perspective there is a problem, because secularism normally means that religions don't interfere into politics, but also it means that states do not interfere into religions. So what we see is, for instance, how the Catholic, the Protestant churches and the Jewish communities are dealt with. There is a Ministry of Cultural Affairs that deals with them. But when it comes to Muslims, it's the Ministry of Interior that deals with them. And I think that already speaks volumes about like how we can make sense of this relationship at the moment.
And I just want to look at the rhetoric a bit, because a top civil servant in the German Interior Ministry, Markus Kerber, he gave an interview recently, and he said, what we need now is an Islam for German Muslims that belongs to Germany. That does not mean that we have to develop a new theology. It means that German Muslims have to decide what kind of Islam do we want here. What do you make of these comments? And I'll ask that to you, Talib.
Well, I think the government intervention in religious affairs will backfire. I think there's a similar attempt in France these days, for example. They have prepared a report to create a French style of Islam. In my view, Islam cannot be ethnicized. Islam cannot be nationalized in that sense. And you cannot really expect people to cut off their roots, because we are living in an age of globalization, first of all. Secondly, we see the emergence of transnational communities. And you cannot really make a clear distinctions between the two. And if you look at Germany, when you look at the Turkish, community, they are well integrated into society. Yeah. When you look at the crime rates, when you look at radicalization, when you look at extremism, you will find hardly anyone within the Turkish community. And I think that is because of the mosques, that is because of the Islamic inculcation, that is because of their perception of Islam. If you try to, I think, isolate Turks or other Muslim minorities from their roots, that will not be in the interest of both sides. And as Farid says, they are living in Germany. It's a secular society, and the government intervention in religion is not acceptable in any secular state. And a few years ago, actually, the German government has decided to establish German Islam Conference. Okay. And some groups are excluded from that conference. And lately, Germany has established 5 different faculty of Islamic studies where they can teach people of Muslim origin. Then the graduates will be teaching at the universities or becoming imams. But that will take a long time. And now we have got a working relations. And remember that 800 imams were sent from Turkey in agreement with the German government. And what happened all of a sudden that the German government is now trying to change its mind?
Good point. And I want your reaction, Farid, to the rhetoric that I commented on that we're hearing from the German ministry.
All right. Well, first of all, I think Muslims in many Western countries feel at home, right? So they don't need governments to tell them they can be at home. And I think really, I mean, what we see when there is a rhetoric and then there is a policy, and often they don't match each other. Because if the state would be really secular in the sense of leaving religion to establish their own things, leave them on their own, nobody, I think, would have a problem. But I think really it's about an interference into what notion of Islam should be developed. And let's take the example of institutionalizing Islamic theology at state universities. We clearly see that, for instance, the Office for the Protection of the Constitution is having an impact in how the structures of these institutions are developed. So it's, you cannot really say, if you look at the facts, that Muslim people are free to develop the way they want to do. But there is an attempt by the state to what I refer to domesticate Islam. And I think it's not really about the issue of having a German Islam or not a German Islam. It's really about like what is the implication on behalf of the state, and what does it mean on behalf of Muslims if they say we want to be like German Muslims. So I think that's 2 different stories, even though they're using the same ways of naming it.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts in this discussion. Talip Küçükcan, thank you. And Farid Hafez, thanks so much for flying in and being with us here at TRT World Straight Talk. Thank you.
Thank you.